Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 266, Leading with Intention, with Dr. Justin Baeder. We need to go beyond compliance in evaluations for teachers. How many teachers experience administration in their classroom for the purpose of understanding their day-to-day rather than to just check a box? Justin Baeder advocates a different approach. Tradition often hinders innovation in education. Teacher evaluations often not only create unproductive incentives, but rarely result in meaningful content-specific feedback. Justin Baeder is the CEO of the Principal Center and is an active education communicator. You can find his newest venture on Substack at The Teaching Show. A portion of this episode will appear on that show as well. I would invite you to check out my portion there, as well as some other awesome teachers that he has been speaking with lately. In this conversation, Justin Baeder and I discuss various aspects of educational leadership, focusing on the importance of classroom walkthroughs, the need for meaningful teacher evaluations, and the challenges posed by tradition in education. We explore the role of trust between teachers and administrators, the impact of COVID-19 on the classroom dynamics, and the necessity of effective discipline policies. Additionally, we dive into innovative approaches to music education, emphasize the significance of treating music as a language, and developing a new pedagogical method to support all students. So stick around and listen to this whole conversation. You will really enjoy it. And then, of course, when you have thoughts and questions and things to add to the conversation, I wish you would head over to the Facebook page called Choralosophers and join a conversation there. Leave a comment, ask a question, spill your thoughts, narrate your brain, as I say to my kids in my class. Narrate your brain over at the Choralosophy Facebook page or on Substack. Your music program or event deserves a platform that does it all, without the extra costs. With Ludus, you get seamless ticketing, built-in marketing, powerful fundraising, and volunteer management, where volunteers can sign up, schedule shifts, and track hours with ease. Need to sell merchandise and concessions in person? Ludus Retail lets you log sales by each group, track inventory, keep everything organized. Hosting music lessons or theater camps? They have a classes feature, which makes registration and student tracking effortless. And it's free for your organization. Thousands of programs already trust Ludus because they help you focus on what matters most, the performance. The Choralosophy discount code can be used at mymusicfolders.com. This is a great place for you to get the choir folders that your program needs. You can also get robes at mychoirrobes.com, which is an affiliated company, and the checkout code works there as well. But it's not just folders and robes. You can get all types of choir-related equipment at mymusicfolders.com and get a discount when you enter the code. I'm not sure how much, if anything, out there has not gone up in price since 2020, but I know one thing that hasn't, and that is the membership to the Patreon and to the Substack to support this show. The people who are signed up over there as paid subscribers, as my thank you to them, they can get things like t-shirts from the choralosophy.com shop. They can also get access to my Google folder of teaching materials that I've talked about on the show for over the years. And of course, they just want to help make sure that this show can continue. A big shout out goes to the producers and Inner Circle over at the Patreon page. These are folks that are really dedicated to keeping the lights on here at this show. Venture Studios, Chandler Smith, Brian Long, Michael Herron, Kyle Peterson, Steve and Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Angie Schilling, Rebecca Chalk, RJ McCracken, Michael Shimp, and Kyle Siddons. All right, everybody, I am here on the Choralosophy side of this recording with Justin Baeder, PhD and administrator, and I'm interested in knowing more about Justin, but I think we're going to be recording stuff for his show as well, which is called The Teacher Show. So Justin, what do you want to tell your people?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Very nice to have the chance to sit down with you. I am very interested for the teaching show in learning more about how you approach your work as a choral music teacher and understanding from a leadership perspective, like what that looks like and what your thinking is like as you approach your work. So again, thanks for sitting down with me.
Yeah, that's great. That's going to be fun. I'm excited about this. I've been a huge fan of your content now for a while. I've never been an administrator, but I work with them and have for quite a while. So I'm interested in your takes on several things. But would you mind telling my audience a little bit more about who you are and kind of what your professional background is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a middle school science teacher and then an elementary principal in Seattle Public Schools. And then about 13 years ago, I started the Principal Center, and that became my full-time work. So I work with school administrators around classroom walkthroughs and teacher evaluation specifically, and do training and make tools to help them just get that work done effectively.
So I'm just curious if you don't mind asking, like, so if a school district reaches out to you to hire the Principal Center for some kind of training, what types of things do you train administrators to do? I know nothing about that side of the education world. So are you able to fill me in on that?
Yeah, the main thing I do for school districts and regional service centers is train administrators how to develop a daily habit of classroom walkthroughs. And that seems to be universally something that principals believe they should be doing, want to do, get into classrooms frequently, see teachers at work, talk with them about their practice. But for most people, it doesn't happen on any kind of consistent basis. Usually it's like once a year, try to do some sort of informal visit, and then the formal observation. And then that typically is it for the year. And that's on the good end of the spectrum. Sometimes it's not even that much, which means we have a lot of teachers being evaluated by people who don't really see them at work very much, if at all. So my mission is really to help administrators get into classrooms much more often, 15 to 18 times per teacher per year. So you just know a lot more about it.
So that's really awesome. I know for myself as a music teacher, I typically am evaluated by someone my administrators are awesome. I'm not criticizing my administrators, but they oftentimes come in exactly as you described, watch me for 10 or 15 minutes, don't know what it is that I'm trying to do. And so give me an evaluation that is I'll just be honest, because that's the kind of vibe of my show. I don't really care what happens on my evaluation anymore, because I know I'm not going to get something that is content specific in my feedback. I'm going to get something that is box checking. That they're doing their job, I'm doing my job, they have to watch me, that's part of their job, but there isn't any kind of like, oh, they're going to help me teach better. Is that kind of what you mean by helping administrators make what they do more meaningful in that way?
Yeah, definitely to go beyond the compliance side. And certainly, I think it's probably the normal experience to have it be kind of okay, we have to do this, go through the motions, it's a compliance process. And hopefully it's not too unpleasant, and hopefully it's not too time consuming. But yeah, I think it can be a whole lot more than that. It can be a whole lot more valuable. It's not always the case that an administrator is the best person to help you grow, right? I mean, that's just the reality is there's content expertise. You probably have colleagues that you like to learn with and from. You probably have people in your specific field that you look up to, and it's not going to ever probably be your direct supervisor. And that just has to do with the scope of supervision responsibilities that administrators have, right? You've got people teaching 20, 30 different classes, lots of different areas of expertise, and you can't be an expert in all of those. So, your ability as an administrator to give detailed, helpful feedback in all of those different subjects, especially at the secondary level, is just going to be very limited. And teacher evaluation criteria and systems are developed to be generic on purpose, right? They're supposed to apply to everybody. Yep. The kindergarten teacher has the same evaluation criteria as the calculus teacher and the PE teacher and the music teacher,
right?
Which is kind of silly. Like if each individual department were to come up with their own evaluation system, they would look nothing alike. But of course, for simplicity and just to have a manageable system, we have one kind of generic system that often just doesn't give us anything that's that useful for from a growth perspective.
I'm just curious, what's your view on why we're there? How did we get there, in the sense of like, what's to stop a district from saying, we have this music teacher in our district, for example, who's been teaching there for 25 years. And we believe that they are the expert in our district about what good music teaching looks like. So they're going to be the one who does the music teacher evaluation, not an administrator who was no offense, a middle school science teacher or whatever. Why does it have to be the way it is in your mind?
I mean, I definitely don't think it has to be the way it is. But that's a very good question. I think there are lots of ways we could design this differently. And most of the reason we do things the way we do is just tradition, and that a system is defensible if it's common. Like if you do the same thing everybody else does, you're not going to get in trouble for that, right? Nobody's going to criticize you for doing what everybody does as a system. Mm-hmm. But if you do something weird and something bad happens, it's likely to be the unusual thing you're doing is likely to be blamed. If you have an administrator evaluating everybody, some of those evaluations might be bad, but it's normal. So, that's kind of an expected thing to happen. If you have a music teacher evaluate all the music teachers and then something unusual happens, it's just, we are comfortable with the things that we're comfortable with in this profession. So I think we just tend
Yeah.
to do what everybody else does because it feels safer and isn't always geared toward maximizing growth or, making things the best for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing because, I'm 23 years into public education now, and I feel like there have been changes in the amount of time that I've been there in my particular district, but also I talk to educators all over the country on a regular basis. And I feel like my experience is not like isolated, which is that administrators now, kind of a more recent generation of administrators, are even more kind of locked into that tradition, which is kind of ironic because we talk more as educators about like growth and innovation than I feel like we did 25 years ago, but it seems more rigid than it was when I started teaching. So for example, it was very normal when I was started teaching for an administrator to bring a new PD program, like here's a new acronym we're going to do and all of these things. But then in that meeting, for an administrator to say to the teachers, the experts on instruction in the building, okay, now guys, shoot holes in this. What are the problems you see with this new initiative? Let's talk about the problems, but then let's try to make it work. And now it's not even, we're not going to talk about the problems. This is just do this. This is the new system. Is this something that you have seen, or am I having an isolated experience, do you think?
I would say I definitely saw a higher degree of respect for teachers in the past than I do today. And I think maybe that comes from two places. One is that if you have a steady pipeline of serious professional teachers who can be trusted and then who become administrators, well, those administrators know that they have good people that they can lean on. And I think what we have seen in recent years is the pipeline into teaching and then therefore the pipeline into administration is a little bit disrupted. And we don't necessarily have that same assumption of professionalism. So maybe there's more fear on the part of administrators that if an idea gets holes poked in it, then those will be fatal. And then that will reflect poorly on the administrator and it won't make the idea stronger. It'll just make the idea die in the water. So I think we do have a little bit more insecurity on the part of administrators and also less trust in teachers because we don't have the history that we used to have of just a strong pipeline of professionalism and people who are in this for their whole career. And I think we're just seeing more career changers both into and out of the profession that maybe makes some of that trust more difficult. What do you think? Like, did you feel more trusted earlier in your career in that sense, or get the sense that was stronger back then?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the pipeline, I think I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. So the pipeline of people coming in and out of the profession, maybe changing over the last 5 to 7 years for me is, I don't want to just say it's since COVID because I feel like it was a thing that I was noticing before COVID also, but for me, it's an issue of getting away from student data that proves that we are doing a good job teaching and getting towards other things that are happening outside of the school building that are bringing policies in. And then also a less receptiveness to the teacher raising their hand in the faculty meeting and saying, but I work with actual human children and none of this makes any sense. And having that be respected rather than now I feel like, for example, now in a faculty meeting, because I'm still the guy, I'm still the old teacher. And I guess now I'm the old teacher that raises their hand in the meeting and says, where's the evidence that are we basing this on any evidence? And then if you ask for evidence, you are looked at with suspicion as if you are like a rabble rouser or something. And to me, that like 25 years ago, that was just like the normal thing. You talk about like, and this is the evidence that we are using to base this right or wrong. The new initiative could be right or wrong, but we're going to base it on this evidence. And if we see issues with it, we should talk about that. And that there doesn't seem to be that culture of openness. And maybe it is. I think maybe your take on that could be part of it that I've never really thought about, which is just that as people come in and out of the profession more frequently, there's less trust. But I'm not really sure. That's an interesting question.
I wonder too what the role of consultants is in all of this, because there seem to be a lot more consultants working in schools now. I mean, like, I just don't remember there being that many consultants. Like the number that I'm hearing about now just kind of boggles my mind. And I think, if you hire somebody to come into your school and do a training for your teachers, you're going to be pretty embarrassed if a lot of people are objecting to what the consultant is saying and, as you said, trying to poke holes in it, which is an intellectually necessary, which isn't, an intellectually honest and necessary thing to do, to make sure that we have actually good ideas. But if we have this status issue where nobody is supposed to question the consultant, then the consultant can get away with saying things that are just not very smart. And we can end up implementing on a pretty large scale things that are not very smart. And we probably have different examples coming to mind for each of us and for each of our listeners that that these ideas have come into the profession on a pretty widespread basis, even though many people could poke holes in them and say, look, this is what's going to happen. If you do that, this is what's going to happen. You probably shouldn't do that. So yeah, I have to wonder if the increase in consultants is behind some of that.
Yeah, I could buy that. And also then the administrator that hires the consultant, they might feel that their reputation is on the line where like, well, I brought this guy in. And so if everybody's challenging him or challenging her or whatever, or the idea or the program, then they're really challenging me. And I've got to justify this big expense. And I think the expense part of it is the other issue that's come about in the last 10 years or so, is these programs districts are buying are expensive.
Yes.
Like they're extremely expensive. And so to justify that expense, I think there might be an incentive there for the stifling of that free inquiry, that academic freedom, so to speak, to borrow the higher ed folks term. But I think that could be part of it too. So I think we might be solving all of education's problems here, Justin.
If we keep at it long enough, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. We're just going to keep digging until we've solved all of the mysteries that happen in schools. Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting. And I'm curious too, because one of the things you sent, let's talk a little bit about the idea you sent in your email, where you're interested in ideas around kind of educational leadership as it relates to content specific delivery of pedagogy. Why don't you tell folks about that and kind of where your interest is related to that?
Yeah. Well, as we talked about earlier, the teacher evaluation systems and processes and rubrics are written generically, so they cover everybody, K-12, all subject areas. And that creates a common process for administrators to follow, and it creates the perception of fairness that everybody's getting the same process. But I don't think anybody believes that the job is really the same if you teach metal shop versus first grade reading. Like those are just very, very different jobs. The kids are at a different stage. The subject matter is very different. The expertise that you bring to the table is very different. The kind of table you teach at is very different in metal shop versus first grade. And I don't think those are differences that we can really sweep under the rug. So we have to do a kind of abstraction and talk a level back in abstraction about practice when we have to use generic terminology. So I'm very interested in the specifics of teaching different subjects and different grades and different courses on the teaching show. That's one of the things I want to not shy away from is those specifics. And I've seen some of your practice and some of the approaches that you use that have basically no applicability directly, at least, to some other subjects. And yet I think we often as administrators tend to evaluate every subject as if it's kind of a like slightly defective version of whatever I taught. Like you're a music teacher, so that's just kind of like a weird science teacher. A math teacher is a less weird science teacher, but still a weird science teacher compared to a regular science teacher. And we all have this lens where everybody's just kind of like a slightly off-kilter version of our normal thing that we taught. I don't know if that's been your experience with that process.
Yeah. So of course that's funny. I've had many different administrators over my teaching career. And I would say the best people I've ever worked for were the ones that recognized and actually verbalized to me that they have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And the reason that was helpful to me is because I no longer then felt like I needed to please them in some kind of a way that was applicable to them. They recognized that what I was doing was its own separate expertise. And they were then able to talk to me about, well, here are the things I can help you with, because there are common things that happen in all classrooms. For example, if student behavior is not going well and you're not doing a good job of managing the classroom and keeping kids on task, et cetera, well, that's something I can help you with. But as far as like the pedagogy of how you get kids to know how to read music, or how do you get kids to be able to operate their vocal mechanism in a healthy way, like I don't know those things. And I honestly don't even know like how you approach it or where to start. And so the best administrators I've ever worked for are the ones that do a really good job of kind of laying out here's where I can help you, and here is where I trust you as the expert in the building. If it's a music question, I trust you, that kind of thing. And that is huge. Like for teachers to hear that, I think is maybe one of the most important things that an administrator can do.
I think a big thing that's behind that is humility, right? The willingness to admit, I don't know everything about your subject and I have some things to learn from you. And I'm not going to necessarily just say everything you're doing is great, but I'm going to assume that you have expertise that I don't, and that I need to learn some things in order to understand your practice on its own terms. I feel like that humility is really central to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and it's interesting because I also have contrast to other administrators that I've worked for in the past that don't do that. And so I think this might be, and I want your opinion on this too, because as coming from the administrator perspective, I imagine, like, and it's just me trying to be empathetic and thinking about what it might be like to be an administrator. I imagine that I would also struggle with imposter syndrome in some ways, where like if I'm in charge of this whole building, I have to like look like I know everything. And I have to look competent in every classroom that I walk into because I'm the leader. And I can imagine that would actually be quite difficult for administrators, maybe even beginning administrators in their first few years, to like, how do I be the leader, but also acknowledge that I don't know certain things? Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. And I wonder is this something you think about, or is this something you train people about, or is it like, or I don't know. Thoughts? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it is a huge issue because administrators are, to some extent, judged on their ability to judge other people in fairly detailed ways, right? Like you're supposed to be able to say, this is good teaching or this is not good teaching. And I think sometimes people go overboard with that in an effort to show that they're competent. They get critical in ways that often don't land. Like for the teacher, like, this criticism is off base. This doesn't make any sense. Why are you harping on this? And it's a clear lack of expertise in that particular area. I think the alternative is humility and curiosity to say, all right, I take you seriously as a teacher. I take my responsibilities as an administrator seriously, but that doesn't mean I'm just going to fake it and just try to be critical in a way that demonstrates my competence. Because like, I'm obviously going to be found out if I try to criticize you and get out of my depth in your subject area. So I think that's just a dangerous move to try that.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that's an interesting thing. I also am curious to know, outside of the training, I've just so many other things that I'm interested in your ideas on, because outside of the training of teachers and outside of the evaluation of teachers, what are some things that you would say to, say, a principal who you're training about the idea of being able to support teachers when parents might have a complaint about like the way a person's teaching that's under your care, so to speak, or your charge. And so a parent calls and says, this person who teaches science, they're teaching it all wrong and they're not a good teacher. And my kid hates this class, and, all these types of things. And then you're left to try to figure out, okay, so is this teacher doing a bad job? I'm not in there. I don't know. I don't see it. And yet at the same time, I also have to present that like, hey, I'm on your side. I'm going to protect you as the administrator. My teachers are going to be my front line of defense, et cetera. So I feel like this is also something that has changed in the last 15 years, is that society and culture, we're getting more complaints from parents than we've ever have. What are administrators' roles in kind of protecting the teacher in those types of situations? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, I think if we don't protect our teachers and show that we're in their corner, we won't have them, right? Like people are just going to leave administrators who don't have their back. That doesn't mean that administrators have to endorse and be okay with the things that are not okay. And certainly, there's room for complaints that are out there. Sometimes those complaints are legitimate and sometimes they're not. But I think what every teacher deserves is attention. They deserve to be known. And that is kind of the worst situation to be in as an administrator, where you hear what sounds like it could be a pretty legitimate complaint against a teacher, and you just don't really know if it's true or not because you're not in the classroom. So I think as a baseline practice, that's why to me it is so critical to be in classrooms frequently. So if someone calls you up and says something about a teacher, you know immediately if it's true or not, right? This teacher's always doing this teacher's always doing that. Well, if you can say, well, I've been in that classroom 17 times this year and I can tell you it's not happening. Or, I know what your kid is talking about, and your kid is giving you the kid version of the story, not what's really happening. And I can tell you exactly what is happening because I'm in there all the time. Like, that's the situation you want to be in as an administrator, so that you're not just backing teachers reflexively because you're on their team or because they're your employee, but because they're in the right. Like, that's the situation we want to be in. And if a teacher is not in the right on something, we want to know about that before the parents do. I had an article on that this past week about,
that's a good point.
The best time to find out you have a problem is before anybody else finds out you have a problem. And often that's not how it happens, right? We find out we have a problem when a parent calls us, and that's not the situation we want to be in.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I had thought of it in terms of, I'd thought of it differently from my perspective, which is that, but I totally agree. I wish that administrators were in my classroom more often. I can think of an example. I'll just tell a story of a time. This was right after the pandemic, when I'm sure you were aware of it, and with your finger on the pulse of education at the time. But kids coming back to school after COVID it was just, teachers were wearing helmets. Like, it was crazy. The things that I dealt with teaching high school was, I would say, in 2020, 2021, 2022 even, of mental health issues with kids. I attended 3 funerals of students, suicide victims, in my class the year we came back. And one of the things that happened during that year was that I became the trusted adult in the building for my administrators to bring me into the room to talk to the kids when we were at another funeral, and they wanted to talk to me. And that was like extremely taxing on my mental health. But for the only time in my career, there was an administrator in my room, in my classroom, like being there with me and the kids, seeing how I actually interact with kids and how I actually teach. And that was really the only time in my entire teaching career of 23 years where that's been true. And which is sad that that's what it took. But the result of that was a situation like you describe, where then with that administration team, if somebody had complained about the way I interact with kids or the way I, create an environment of safety or whatever, if they have a complaint about that, those administrators would be like, yeah, no, that's not how this classroom is. I'm in there all the time. I've seen this in action, but I've honestly never thought of it the way you just described, where are we just responding to support the teacher out of reflex, or are we like, no, because I've seen him teach? That's a really good, and for more than just clicking the box to fill in the state evaluation thing. It's got to be more than that. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we want to be proud of everybody. We want to defend everybody, but we have to know specifics in order to do that.
Yeah.
And I think we are in a time societally where there's just a lot less trust between families and schools, right? There was a time when there was a lot of deference toward educators. If the teacher says, you did it, you're guilty, go to your room. But now there's a lot more tendency to push back. Often before the student gets home, they've texted their parent sharing their side of the story. So even before the school makes a phone call, the parent is kind of up in arms. I think we're just in a different place. So I think that puts us in a different position to need to know each other, to know our practice, to know what's going on in classrooms.
Yeah, that's true. So I saw a video of yours that was about multiple intelligences, and it led me to think about that, but also other kind of educator, like common myths that educators believe. So learning styles would be an example. Multiple intelligences would be an example. One of my pet peeves is Maslow's hierarchy, but not that Maslow's hierarchy by itself is a myth, but that it's an actual pyramid. That if you have to do this step before you do this step and this step. And of course, Maslow never actually even wrote that or even claimed that, but we base so many things in schools on this. So do you have any certain pet peeves of education myths, or I would also love to hear your thoughts and share with my audience about this multiple intelligences thing too. Take it away.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, because Howard Gardner's been talking about this for, 43 years or so now, and has never, I don't think, paid any kind of professional price for basically being wrong about the whole thing. There's this idea that if we teach every student according to their intelligences and according to their learning styles, there are kind of a couple different related ideas there. But that if we teach all of our students in a way that works best for them, then they'll learn more, that our lessons will be more successful. And so far, we have found lots of evidence that that is not the case, and have found no evidence that that really is the case. And yet the idea is still very current, very widely circulating. And I would say probably the majority of teachers have not been told that this is an idea that has not held up, right? The scientific evidence for multiple intelligences is just not there. And we know that by now. And yet as a profession, we don't know it. We're not aware. And part of that, I think, comes down to teacher education. Some of it comes down to the colleges of education actually teaching things that have been discredited scientifically. I think part of it comes down to just the informal nature of understandings of things like this. We just kind of talk about, learning styles and multiple intelligences casually as a profession. There's kind of a feeling that it would be rude to to disagree with somebody. Like if I'm coming to you, Chris, and saying how great it is that you teach to the multiple intelligences in your classroom, your music classroom, just for the kids that have that musical intelligence, it's just such a great thing. Like, it's going to be a little awkward for you to say, hey, actually, Justin, that theory is bunk. Can we stop using that language, please?
Right.
So it's just dragged on, I think, for generations now.
Yeah, but I rate very low on agreeableness just in general. And so I don't really understand that, because if believing false things about the way kids learn could potentially harm kids, then in school, I see it as a professional responsibility for us to speak up and say, but actually, that's not a real thing. Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned agreeableness, because I think big five personality traits are one of the few true things that we know in psychology. I'm like, that's solid. There's tons of evidence for the big five personality traits. Not sure what you do with that instructionally, but I think we, as you said, it can be kind of a good thing in the profession to have people who are not always just agreeing with everything. But I think the profession does attract people who are higher in agreeableness in general, right? We hire for collegiality. Often collaboration is treated as an inherently good and necessary thing, even for work that has no obvious collaborative nature. We'll make people collaborate even when there's nothing to collaborate on, just because we think collaboration is good. And I also think we don't want to say that something is a waste of time or a distraction if it feels like it's kind of a good to neutral thing. Being engaging in lots of different ways is kind of a generally good thing. Then it doesn't matter all that much if multiple intelligence is false. Like we make ourselves feel good about the feel good parts of it, and we decline to feel bad about the drawbacks of something. And I think part of that comes also from a lack of concern or even a hostility to the idea of efficiency. Efficiency seems like a lack of caring. And if we care too much about efficiency, maybe we're focused on the wrong things. And that allows us to allow in things that are a waste of time, that are wrong, that are false, and to just not want to confront them because it's unpleasant, it's not agreeable, and maybe it's not that big a deal. And I just think that's been kind of the norm in our profession for a very long time.
Yeah, you got my wheels spinning now, because I never thought about that either. So maybe it could be tapping into that criticism of the education model as going back to the Prussian model of education, of just creating feelingless automatons that just do tasks, etc. And so if we get too efficient, we feel like we're going back to that. And so it's vibes. It's like we just don't like the vibes of that. Yeah. And to me, that's unacceptable. It can't be vibes. It can't be vibes. It either works or it doesn't work. The kids either know more stuff than when they came in, or they don't. And so, yeah, I guess there should be some automation. Like we are a learning factory in a sense. Like if the kids aren't learning something, then there's something's wrong. So yeah, that's interesting. I think that's also probably related to the other thing I wanted to ask you about, which is student discipline. You have a video also on your channel about exclusion, which is one of my pet peeves as well, because I see what you're criticizing in that video, which is that there seems to be a vibes-based, in my opinion, criticism of, well, we don't want to kick kids out of class because then when they're not in class, they don't get to learn, and et cetera. But you make some pretty nuanced kind of critiques of that feeling. So what makes that worthy of you making a video?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think there's anybody really, writing books on kind of the basics of how discipline works. So it's been really interesting that I'm just not encountering any competing ideas out there. And I think we've got to think about school as a social setting, right? School is a social setting, but it's not a natural one. It's an artificial environment that we've created for educational purposes, where we're bringing kids together that, some of whom don't really want to be there. And we have to figure out how to do that in a way that's functional despite the wide range of possible behaviors that could occur. And now that we're thankfully in an era when we don't use harsh punishments, we don't use corporal punishment, we don't use lots of things that have been used throughout history to kind of control behavior. One of the best tools that's available to us is exclusion. And I think exclusion is also the most fundamental social technology, right? Like if you are going to come and sit around my campfire and share in my meal that I've prepared, you have to treat me right. And if you don't, then we're not going to sit around the same campfire. And I might even get up and leave if you're not treating me right. So I think that is the very basis of human society, that, inclusion depends on behaving right, acting right, and behaving in a way that's compatible with other people. So if you're going to, steal the food from everybody else around the campfire, nobody's going to sit with you. And in an artificial environment like a school that is a social environment, we have to take responsibility for that as adults, because the kids don't have a choice, right? The kids have to be there. They have to deal with whatever the other kids' behaviors are that we're willing to tolerate. And there's this idea going around now that exclusion is cruel in some way. And I think what people miss when they say that about inclusion is they don't realize that everybody's being excluded from the intended purpose of the activity if anybody is allowed to disrupt it, right? If we're all here to learn and Justin is shutting down the learning by being terrible in some way or hurting people or disrupting whatever Justin is doing, then the only alternative to excluding Justin is to just let go of the purpose of why we're here in the first place. And it's very interesting and strange to hear people explicitly advocating for that, for saying, okay, like clearly this kid is doing something that is incompatible with learning, incompatible with safely being in the classroom. But it's so important that we not take them out of the classroom, that we're going to allow the whole reason we're there to be completely undermined. Like this just does not make any sense to me. And people are explicitly advocating for that now. And I think that's just kind of madness.
Well, I think isn't that partly related to, or maybe explicitly related to, restorative justice concepts, that we can't restore Justin to wholeness if we remove him from the classroom.
Yeah, and that's an interesting idea, because restorative justice comes from the criminal justice system. And my understanding is that it was intended to be used after someone had been incarcerated, after they had served their sentence and were coming back to the community. It wasn't, Justin commits a crime and then immediately there's a sit down with the victim's family and everything's hunky-dory. Like, no, that was not the context at all. It was, justice is served first, and then kind of as a reentry into society and maybe closure for everybody, there is an option to have some sort of restorative conversation. But I think we like the quick and easy version of everything. And I think there's a lot of appeal to this idea that, like, hey, we don't have to have consequences. We don't have to have suspension. We don't have to have anybody out of class in a way that shows up in our statistics. So maybe restore, it could have been something else. But I think the appeal is the cheapness of it, the easy button aspect of it, that like hopefully we can just make this all go away, right? Can't we just make this go away? And of course we can't.
Yeah. Well, I think it's related to that, but I also think there's other ideas that are baked into the pie of this issue, which another one of them I think is the belief in this school to prison pipeline kind of a concept. And that's also baked in with the restorative concept, and which is also baked into the we don't want to send Justin out of the classroom thing, because a lot of teachers and administrators believe in this idea that if Justin, by excluding him, then we're going to create the next bank robber. We're going to create the next serial killer or whatever, or the next school shooter or whatever it is. And I don't know that there's any evidence of that, but I think that that's also partly what causes people to pull back away from what would be normal kind of common sense. Like if you were dealing with 3-4-year-olds in your living room, for example, and one of them was just going ham on the other two and tearing their toys away and smacking in the face, any adult, any educator in a home environment would immediately take that violent kid away from the other two kids. But suddenly in a school, we have different logic.
Yeah, and I think that logic of the school to prison pipeline is appealing to people because we can see how it would be true in the most egregious cases, right? Like if we are calling the police because, a 5-year-old in the lunchroom throws their Skittles or whatever. Like, obviously there are things we could do that could start kids down that road, that would be far too extreme on our part. I think we get so afraid of those extreme cases, though, that we get ridiculous in the other direction and say, okay, like even when we have actual violence in the classroom, we have to tolerate it because we don't want to trigger the school to prison pipeline. Well, it's like, in that case, it's the violence that's going to probably get this kid landed in jail. And what's really interesting to look at the empirical evidence now is that we have enough cases where there have been discipline reform efforts put in place that we actually know when you are softer on the rules, when you are softer on consequences in school, the school to prison pipeline gets worse, right? These things escalate outside of school, right? If we allow kids to bully one another in the classroom and don't do anything about it because we don't want to call the police or we don't want to suspend, well, all of that spills over into real world violence and real world consequences in ways that, probably were kind of predictable, but really are showing up in the data now. That, like, we're not doing kids any favors on the school to prison pipeline front by being more lenient about bad behavior at all. It's backfiring.
Oh my goodness, yes, you are so dead on. You were dead on, and I think that there's a parallel there that I see in just classroom management for teachers in general, which is that we enable worse behavior the less structure we provide them, because the kids will fill the inefficient time with craziness. Like if your lesson is not well structured, so that there's downtime, and this is something I do a lot of PD around the country for different music education stuff. And it's one of the things that I teach in those is that if, as music directors, because I direct like ensemble music primarily, I teach some other music classes too, but primarily music ensembles, if I've got 40, 50 kids in front of me, my biggest class is 80. Last year's 95. If I've got this many kids in the room and I stop the rehearsal and then appear to be confused about what we're going to do next, and I'll get back with you in 2 minutes, there will be chaos in the room, and that will lead to a behavior, maybe a negative or bad behavior that probably would not have happened had I just had my shit together, like that. And I think when you extend it out to what you were just talking about, which is building level discipline policies, and when we're talking about the whole building, the same principle applies. If we allow students to fill the void and with no consequences, they might make a decision to do something even worse than they ever would have done had we, as the adults in the building, just had our stuff together about how the expectations would be meted out in the building. Thoughts on that? Am I onto something? I've never been a principal, but
no, yeah, absolutely. Again, I think it goes back to the reality that school is a constructed environment. It's an environment that we're responsible for as adults because we make the kids be there and we set the rules. And kids will naturally test boundaries. Kids will naturally pick at each other. They'll naturally, compete with one another and get into little fights, and like to some extent that kind of thing is developmentally appropriate, right? Like it's necessary for kids to show off to each other and kind of challenge one another. That's just part of growing up and being a teenager and becoming an adult. And we have to be the ones to keep that a safe process, right? To keep kids safe in the school environment. And it's natural for kids to test those boundaries. And I think when we make kids realize that there are no boundaries, we're not doing our job as adults. We're letting kids test the boundaries and then get away with it and realize, I don't know who's running the show here, because it's not the adults. Maybe it's me. I don't think that's a good message for kids to get. And it certainly is not conducive to education.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, totally agree.
Welcome everyone to The Teaching Show. I'm your host, Justin Baeder, and I'm honored to be joined in this episode by Chris Muntz. Chris, welcome to The Teaching Show.
Hey, thanks, Justin. I'm a big fan. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited to be on your podcast and to trade airtime with you here a little bit. But I was very excited to speak with you because I saw you demoing a technique in a video for having students read music. So you are a choral music teacher and an ensemble music teacher. And I got to see some pedagogy that we very rarely get to see and hardly ever talk about that was just very, very specific to your subject. So tell us a little bit about yourself and then take us into that practice that I saw in the video.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So my name's Chris, and I am a veteran, I guess you could say now, because I'm old, music teacher outside of the Kansas City area. And I've been teaching for over 20 years. And my entire career has been at the high school level in what you could call in Missouri, we would call a 5A, which means large high school in Missouri. And my whole career has been in that world. So I don't have any elementary school experience or anything like that, but a very, very specific to what I do, mostly ensemble music. I also teach a music appreciation class. And then, of course, I do the Choralosophy podcast, which is music education, professional development, but also current topics and issues we discuss on the show, including controversial ones, but also ones that are meaningful to the lives of teachers and are things that we deal with all the time. So I do all of those things and I wear lots of hats. Now, in the video you're referencing, the best way I could explain this to you would be like, I'm a huge believer, not all choral musicians, music teachers are, but this is one of my crusades, is that we are one of the best weapons that a school district has to advance literacy, because the same parts of the brain light up when a person is reading music as when they are reading any other language. So I'm a big music as a language person, and that it is a language that is very complicated in comparison to almost all other human languages because of the specificity that you have to have in terms of exact frequencies and durations. So the frequency and duration of the pitch, the time, the rhythm, all those things are more specific than other languages, but every other aspect of it, it's the same. So if you think about like, if I read English, I open up a piece of paper or a computer or whatever it is, and I see a bunch of symbols and squiggles and lines, and I look at those squiggles and lines, and I hear a sound in my head, and it might be the word the, right? But I see it, and as soon as I see THE on the page, I hear that sound, and I also can contextualize it. For example, if I ask you, what does th mean? Well, then you would be like, that doesn't mean anything. I need context. But as soon as you put the after it, well, that's the word the, and here's how I would use that. And so I teach students that music does the same thing. And we're going to learn to look at these symbols on the page, and we're going to learn to read it with as much fluency as we would if it were English or Mandarin Chinese or whatever language we're learning to read, which is also a pitched language, by the way. Mandarin's a pitched language. And so there's very similar concepts there. And so in the video you saw, those were, in fairness, my advanced kids, because I teach in my program, we have beginning level music for kids who have never done music before. They can jump right in and start, and then they can get all the way up to advanced level, which you saw in that video, where I passed out a piece of music, a relatively complicated piece of music for them that they had never seen before. And I had them open it. And because music requires specific pitch, I play a particular pitch, which represents the key the song is in. But that's the only information they got. They got, this is the key we're in. And then I asked them to try to hear the music happening in their head by simply looking at it. And then I asked them to memorize the music, but we had never sung it before. So they had to then close their eyes, and I said, okay, 1, 2, ready, go. And they had to sing the music from memory that they had never sung and heard out loud at all. And what I was demonstrating to them and to other teachers in that video is that you can actually teach kids to do that with the music, which is mystifying to people. But if it was English, nobody would be mystified, because you would look at it like, oh, well, they just read C spot run and they memorized it and they closed their eyes and they said C spot run, and everybody can do that. That's easy. But the weird thing about my pedagogy, I guess, is that I'm teaching kids to do that with music as well.
I love it. I love it. And I love the opportunity for understanding that an observer gets from just kind of knowing what you're going for, knowing what your instructional purpose is. And I think so often we second guess, or we try to copy, or we try to make some sort of decision about what we're seeing without really understanding the internal logic of it. So you're saying music is a language and is taught in many ways that are similar to teaching other languages?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And these are kind of innovations that through this platform on Choralosophy that I've been developing, because again, this is not what you saw is not normal. Like, that's not how most music classrooms operate. But we're kind of creating a trend in the profession to go more towards this linguistic basis. So for example, when students are new in my program from the very beginning level, so 9th grade for us, for the most part, or other kids who just decide to take it later, 11th graders even can take my class as a beginner. What I do is I bring them into a private setting so that they're not on the spot in about October of every school year. So when they're brand new, we establish certain safety and trust in August, September, and then early October, I bring them in and then screen them, because by the high school level, nobody's really taught them to read music before in my district for the most part. And so I screen them very much like a young kindergarten teacher might screen a young student for literacy readiness. And just like they might have leveled readers, for example, in a kindergarten class or a first grade class, I have a software that I use that is music reading by level. And so I determine, okay, this kid should be a level 1 reader right now. This kid should be a level 2 reader. And I assign them based on what I see in that evaluation. It's like a pretest. And then their grade in my music class comes from their ability to progress through those levels by doing the practice assignments that I give them. And it gets to the point where in that video you saw, those kids have all been through that process for 3 or 4 years. So they're all reading at a level that would be considered professional level or collegiate level, but they're doing it by 10th, 11th, and 12th grade because they're doing it alone. That, like, they're doing it by themselves, and they're getting that feedback from me about, very much like a reading student in any other language would get, which is that, well, yeah, so your fluency is not quite there yet. You're decoding just fine, but you're not moving through the music fluently. And so I use a lot of the same language that a science of reading type approach would, and I use that same type of language with music instruction as well. And it helps the kids a lot, because then they start to demystify the music, instead of saying things like, oh, I'm bad at music or I'm good at music. Like, oh, I just need to work on my fluency. My kids will say stuff like that. It impacts their I guess their psychology about the learning. Even if they mess up, they feel like, oh, well, I just need to work on this, this, and this, and I'll be fine. That kind of thing. And so it really helps.
I love it. I love it. And it seems like probably the more typical thing to do would be to tell students to read the music and then sing it or play it, right? Would that be the more normal exercise for reading music?
Yeah, of course. And we do that too. What I try to do is I try to change the way they interact with the music as much as possible, so that they're having to come to it from different angles. So for example, again, I'll just keep using metaphors for written language and other things. If you were to say, yeah, I'm totally fluent in English, but then I start talking to you and you can't understand anything I'm saying, then I would question whether or not you're literate. And then you say, or whether or not you're fluent. And then you say, well, but I can read it off the page. Well, okay, but you're not, then you're not really fluent. And so, because I was fluent in French when I was younger, but then I stopped speaking it, and I can still read it off the page because I can go at my own speed. But if someone starts talking to me, I can't understand French anymore. It goes by too fast. And so I would no longer claim to be fluent. I'm literate, moderately literate in French, but I'm no longer conversationally fluent. And so music operates in a similar way. And so not only do we do activities like you saw in the video, but I also do things like where I will simply play a song for them on a piano and ask them to write down what they heard. So they then have to notate the music that they heard, which, again, a language fluency person would have to be able to do that. Like if I say C spot run, you should be able to write down C spot run. And so we teach the kids to go from that angle too. Or sometimes it's just error detection, where I'll show them music and I'll play something or sing something wrong on purpose and have them go through and find where the error was, those types of things. And by approaching it in all those different ways, they're getting what I call whole language of music approach. And then when we try to learn music that we perform, because we are a performance-based curriculum, ultimately the goal is to get up on stage and do a song. But what we then do is, because they're getting all that approach, that when I hand them a song, they're no longer scared of it. They know they have the tools to go learn it themselves. And one of my big philosophies is that I don't want to be the high priest of music in my classroom. I don't want them to have to go through me to get to the music. I want them to have the tools for me to hand them the music, and then they can go off and learn it, and get as much of that from them, their own skills, as possible. Their pride in the final product is greater at that point too. They like, I did that. Mr. Munz didn't do that for me. I did that, and that's one of my big things.
And you're really adapting to some extent, but you're really developing new pedagogy that is not out there already, it sounds like.
That is correct. Yeah, and it gets me. I have enemies as a result. I mean, I'm really challenging the profession, because there are certain kind of tried and true methods that I've made certain arguments against based on the way that I do it, but also because many teachers now over the last 7 years, I've been kind of preaching this curriculum. People are doing this all over the country now, and it's working. But one of the reasons that I'm preaching it is that I believe that there's an old way that we used to do music, and I grew up under this old way, which is that we were unwittingly privileging the kids in public school music classes that were coming to those music classes with prior music knowledge. And then we were lifting them up as the most talented ones, and also lifting ourselves up as really good teachers. But really it was just because somebody had learned music outside of school, and they had come and then made me look really good as the music teacher because they were in my group. And I taught under that model. And I'm not, so when I say that, I'm not criticizing others. I did it too. Like when I was a young teacher, I essentially was talent scouting. I was looking in the school building for the kids who have the most natural ability, and I was trying to pull them into my class so that we could make this good choir. And now my pedagogical approach is so different. It's more like I want every kid, because I believe that I can teach every kid to know how to do this. And if we can all do this, then that means that the kid who doesn't have piano lessons, the kid who doesn't have a mom who's a stage mom who like puts them on stage from age 4 and like makes them do all these things, like those kids have always been privileged in music classes. But I want the kid to be successful in my class who's shy, who stands off to the side and is not the stage kid. I'm a father of a special needs learner who she's dyslexic and has all kinds of learning challenges. I want her to feel smart in my class. And she is currently an 11th grader in my class. And she feels like she's smart because she can do it, because I've figured out the pedagogy I'm approaching is basically we're grading on growth. I don't care where you start. Every kid in my class is going to get an A based on whether or not they're getting better at all these things. It's not how good they get. It's whether or not they are getting better at those things. And I've developed a system for tracking that and for keeping data and proving it and, all that kind of stuff too. So I'm getting animated. You can tell I'm very passionate about this, but you're right. It is a new approach to pedagogy.
Well, Chris, if people want to learn more about that approach or about your podcast, where can they go online to find you?
So choralosophy.com is the website. And of course, same place you found some certain things. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, Choralosophy, and I'm on Facebook. But the website has a lot of subcategories of episodes. I've been doing podcasts since 2019. A lot of them are pedagogical episodes. They're not all pedagogy. Sometimes we just talk about current events and social issues and the humanities and philosophy and, all kinds of stuff. A lot of it is pedagogy stuff. And so on my website, I've created a place where somebody could go and just hear episodes about teaching kids to read music. And so I've got that all on a sub page. It's just choralosophy.com/music literacy. And those types of things, or just how the voice works. I do a lot of episodes about that and as well. But that's the main thing, is just going to choralosophy.com.
Chris, thank you so much for joining me on The Teaching Show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And before we finish then, I would like for you to do a similar thing and tell my folks where they can find stuff about how to be the perfect principal like Justin Baeder.
I don't know about that, but you can find all of my articles and resources for school leaders at principalcenter.com. And you can find The Teaching Show at teachingshow.com. And we also have a news, practice, and policy show at EduLeadership.
Very cool. And what about social media stuff?
EduLeadership on most social media, but all of them are listed at principalcenter.com/follow.
Awesome. Now, is your teacher show, is it relatively new?
It is. You'll be one of my first 10 guests. We've got a couple out now and more coming soon. So very excited to get this off the ground.
Now, are you putting it on podcast platforms as well, or is it just a video show only?
It is primarily a video show, and it's on Substack, so you can subscribe with a podcast app to get the audio.
Oh, okay.
We'll sometimes have video elements that would be, a good reason to actually watch the video. But yeah, people can subscribe in a podcast app.
Awesome. Well, Justin, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a blast.
Likewise. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.